So then you have to take off the two cast iron or cast steel mounts. Don't drop them. Might be expensive. I have no idea. But anyway, there's four bolts in each, two at the front, two at the back. Easier to take them off. And I use some good old 2x4s to keep this thing mounted properly. And this is what it looks like without the mounts on. I've got the bolts all loosened and I'm about ready to pull this cover off with this passenger side rear axle and just see what's going on in there. Of course, this is operator error. You can tell the sarcasm in my voice, I hope. But this collar with the long pins, which are supposed to go all the way through and into that gear. Look at the gap here. And look at how thin this is. These things are breaking because it's crap. Look how much movement is in there after they broke. This collar barely moves back and forth. I'm not sure how much engagement there is into the pins, but the frickin' leverage. That's ridiculous. This is the second repair in 2,500 hours. Lucky for us amateurs who don't have a press. This bearing is just a slip fit. It's very snug, very precise. And I just used a couple of bars to pry it up. Well, actually the hammer edge in this thing. And just did a rotation this way and just popped that off. So don't worry about having a press to put that bearing and the one on the other side on or off because it's just a slip fit. To take this pin out for the spider gear, it goes through in there. We have to undo these few bolts here, and that gear will fall right off, and that'll open up the housing. And I think there's a retainer in there as well as just the gear, but I'm not sure. That pin will slip out, and then we can take the gears out. But we can see already there's a little bit of surface damage here, which I have to be patched up. I might be able to drill those out to the 12mm and still use this housing, depending how much damage is on this other side. But if I can save the old house, or the brand new housing and the brand new pin that I've got, if necessary, I can use it for the next repair. Okay, this is the second one taken out here. And we can see a little bit of damage on the surface there. This is the gear with the holes in it, and you can see that this one, that one, and this one are more damaged than the other four, because that's where when the pins broke, but I continued to use the tractor. And what that does too in the housing is it, let's see if we can get some light in there. You can see kind of how that's splayed out there. So the broken pins are stretching out and just grinding the edge off the cast iron. So I don't know, when I decide to drill the pins out to 12mm, there might be enough meat on here and substance that I can just reuse this housing, because it should be sturdy enough, these pins, without flexing. If they don't break, they're not going to gouge out the backside, but it's just going to, well, we're just going to have to see. If nothing else, as my wife said, I've got nothing to lose by trying. And if I can reuse this housing, then I got the brand new one as a backup. And if I punch out, well, I punched out the pins on the old one, the first one, and I can always punch out the pins on that one to put in the 12mm pins. And well, we'll just see what happens. One step at a time. That's the way I do things. I just do it one step at a time. So. Also remember to check your fork. Just, oh yeah, that's still moving nice and smooth. That's where I had the problem the first time. The edges all splayed up and that thing jammed up and it wouldn't release. It's as smooth as silk right now, as you can tell. I just took that out. You gotta make sure that that shaft is clean, because when you assemble or disassemble, it has to go in that little hole right there, and there's a bushing and a seal down there, and you don't want your oil leaking out. For those that are interested, this is your brake pack in here. These shim washers, your shims and washers behind these gears, I assume they're the same on both, but I have not mic'd them, so I will do that this time. I know the last time I just kept them separate. Just a note. I've taken a standard concrete bit and I've sharpened it up, and I put it in this vise and centered it by doing that, and then I just tighten up on the vise. Oh, that's not quite right. I'm just trying to do this one-handed for demonstration purposes. Let's see if we can get in there. I center it up, and then I tighten up the vise, and with the sharpened carbide I've just forced it down into the hole with some cutting oil, and it worked. Now this size here isn't large enough. Like I say, the hole is only 1130-ish, 11.3 millimeters. I'm not very good with the camera here. I keep getting caught up on things on the workbench. So there's a 10 in 11.3 millimeter hole. So we got some play. So you know that that's going to, get larger. But there's quite a difference between the 12 and the 10 millimeter pins. Only sounds like 2, but the 12 is actually 44% larger cross area than the 10 millimeter. So I'm hoping with the whole system put in, and well, I got my 8 holes drilled. The second carbide that I used was a bit softer than the first one or something, because it didn't wear as well. But that's okay. We got the 8 holes done, and when you put them side by side with this one, you can see that there's quite a difference. But does it impact the gear, the extra size? There's a little less material here, like a millimeter, than here, and it's a little bit further in there than here. So is that going to be a problem at all? I don't think so. I've got this all buffed off to take the sharp edges off of it. A little bit of sandpaper. Any scratches will help hold oil. I'm not worried about scratches on a machined surface like this. It doesn't have to be perfectly smooth. Plus there is I think there's a washer that goes in here between this and the carrier. So yeah, I don't see it as a problem. Anything that will hold a little extra oil in there, catch a bit of oil, as long as it's not a burr and scratches and gouges, it shouldn't be a problem. So I'm getting excited. Now I have to do the holes in here and the holes in the collar. Maybe I should do the holes in the collar first, make sure that the pins fit. I mean, this isn't costing me anything except my time and the materials that I bought, or the drill bits that I bought, or the pins that I bought. which is insignificant to the cost of the $300 that for the new carrier and the new collar, which I have, and I can throw that in too, stock. So I'm still playing with the original parts that came on the tractor when I bought it, and they had 1,500 hours on it when the Diff-Lock pins broke. In fact, when I look at this, I'm thinking, you know, if you want to replace cheap pins, bolts, that's 10 millimeter grade 8 bolts. That probably would work fine. I mean, they fit nice. They just fit right in there. But you can buy, and I got them through Fastenal. You can buy what do they call these things again? Not roll pins. They call them. I'll think of it. So a couple interesting things with this differential lock in the BX series and some of the smaller Bs, I guess, on the Diff-Lock. First thing I'll mention is that I'm putting in larger pins, larger than stock. This is a stock collar with 10 millimeter pins, and this other one here has the modified 12 millimeter pins that I want to put in. Just to show you here, this is the gear that the pins lock into in the differential. This is part of the differential thing, and the reason why your two tires have to move in at different speeds for the gear to lock in, because if you're trying to push that gear in, or the pins into the gear, and you're in this area with the pedal down, you have to wait until this gear here moves. We'll just say that this is locked in that position. This gear has to rotate till this can lock into the holes. So people that are running around and their pins are actually riding up here are putting a lot of pressure on the mechanism without any accomplishment. If they drive only straight forward, you need to turn to make the differential gears move so that can lock into place. And then you have to make sure that this collar stays fully engaged, because in the hub it only engages by a few millimeters, which is adequate in most instances. Now, as you can see here too, I don't have a new one of these. This is one that's been damaged. It was originally a 10 millimeter, and this is the one I've drilled out to 12 millimeter using a carbide drill. So the stock 10 millimeter collar and pins also has to accommodate the thrust washer behind this gear, which rides on this surface in the differential and underneath here. And that thrust washer, takes the load as the gear turns. Hard to do this in that spot there, right? So the gear is in there and the thrust washer takes the load to the case. Now that I've increased the pin to 12, this washer has a binding problem in that these little notches will fit where the new bigger pins go, but this thrust washer isn't free to rotate. So I need to take off a millimeter or so of, probably about 2 millimeters off the edge of this thrust washer. Now this thrust washer has been in this tractor for 2,500 hours, and I ordered new thrust washers, and they're actually 1/1000th of an inch, 1/1000th of a millimeter thicker than the replacement ones I ordered, which is interesting. So what I'm working on now is as you can see here, that we need those. We don't want those to line up. We need to have this thrust washer rotate without any interference to the pins. And these are the 12mm pins, or you're going to have an issue, right? They're just not going to engage. So that wouldn't be good. And you can see the washer. So that is the next step for me. I'm just busy doing that. And I did order new thrust washers, but since they're actually thinner than the original by 1/1000th of a millimeter, I'm just going to grind these ones up and keep the others to go with my brand new case and my brand new pins, which and collar, which are here, right? So that's the process I'm on to now. And I only need to do one side because the other side, the gears don't have holes in them, and it's not relevant, so I can leave the full-size washer there. I'm just grinding this down on a grind wheel just by hand, and I'll measure it out and burnish it off, but it will still leave lots of material to wear. And as I said, they have 2,500 hours on this, and most people hardly use a Diff-Lock compared to what I do. So we'll see how that works. And you can see with this ground washer compared to the other stock one, there's very little difference. Okay, there's many parts to assembling this. This is the matching gear to the ones that have the holes in it. And this thrust washer here is the one that I ground. So I'm going to put it on the far side because I think it was slightly damaged. So I ground the other one. But I mean, everything's polished up and smooth now. These holes here, I think, are for lubrication purposes to help spread oil around. And this just fits in to the bottom here first, with that thrust washer in place. And then this thrust washer, which is designed for the 12mm pins now. Yeah, that fits. And it goes on top. Nicely machined, actually. Very close tolerances on some stuff. So then, now, we need to put these other gears in. These are what I call the floating spider, and these are the actual spider gears, I guess. So put one in the top, put one in the bottom, and we'll line them up. And they get their own nice little washers, which have slots in here for the washers to line up to. Just a minute here, let me rotate this thing. Okay. So that's what I mean again, that one tire has to turn more than the other for these gears to move around to lock in the differential. Now, this has a little tab on it that needs to find that little hole up there. And I actually forget how I did this before. And doing this on video is no fun either because I'm not really paying attention. Maybe they go in first. Doing a great job with my lighting here. Okay. So, yeah. So if we can wiggle those. Okay, so I can't wiggle the washers into place. And you could back this up a little bit, and I'll put the washer in from the other side first, and then slide the gear over top. And then the shaft, which has keyway in it, has to line up here. So, keyway is there and there. And I need to be able to rotate that washer into place. Okay, well, I shouldn't be doing this on video. Here we go. Here, maybe there's a smart way of doing it. Let's look in there. Oh, and you probably can't see, but I can see in there, and I can line that up now before I put the shaft in. So I'll do that on both sides. Okay, I've got it lined up on the top side here, and the bottom one moved. So I'm thinking the opportune thing would be to put the shaft in, line up the notch, because the little tab is in the slot there. There we go, we get it through there. And we'll slide it down to the other side, where the thrust washer is a little bit off, and we got to get that little tab lined up. I guess I should use a screwdriver or something there. There we go. Let's push it in there. Okay, so yeah, we've got that little tab lined up here, and the little wiggle jiggle. We should be able to, whoops, no, it isn't lined up. Okay, let's just try that. A little wiggle jiggle, and I think we got her. There we go. There we go. So we've got that in place, and then there's a little keyway that's supposed to fit in here, back here. Okay, so there we go. So the gears are lined up, the thrust washers are all in, all four. I'm going to put the keyway in here, or at least attempt to. Oh, okay, so it has a very specific way it wants to go in there. So now you don't want that to come out. And again, we can see how the Diff-Lock moves back and forth. Just make sure that shaft doesn't move out. And our thrust washers are in, as I said before. And then our collar will go on here through that hole. Like that. And if we rotate the gear set, there we go. Now this bearing goes on here. It just a very snug fit, slips on there, and it backs this up. So that disengages the pin, which you can kind of see in there, I guess. And the gears spin freely when it's backed all the way out. And when we spin it, we can see how much engagement we have now. All the way out, they spin, and then now they lock in. Looks pretty successful to me. And considering those pins are 44% larger in area, I'm hoping I don't have any more problem with this stock system with my custom. Okay, so we now have the bearings on, and They sure run nice. And we're looking at the modified Diff-Lock, the 12mm pins. And as you can tell, they're extending through the case here a little bit. The collar backs onto this bearing so it can't come back any further. But as you can also tell, there's very little movement now until the pins actually engage the gear here. And that's fully engaged. However, if you put it here without moving this back gear, like people who drive in a straight line, as even Kubota suggests, some people at Kubota suggest you drive in a straight line until your differential lock engages. But anyway, we all know that we need that hole and those pins to line up. So you can see that there isn't a lot of movement. And these pins are 4mm longer than stock. And that's why they stick out a little past the case here now. Now, if those pins don't break, they can't bend. They can't damage the case. There's a larger surface that they can push against the case now as they protrude through the holes. And I'm expecting no issues with this now. And I mean, holes that are in this gear that are only 2mm larger in diameter, as you saw, won't make a spot of difference to the strength of this gear, but will definitely add to the strength of the differential lock pins. Isn't that beautiful? I'm so happy with my work. See, it doesn't have to turn very much. And that's why I say just turn slightly, and it'll find a spot to go in, engage. And then you got to make sure that this pedal stays down. In this case, the pedal can come up a little bit and I still maintain engagement. But on stock, if that pedal comes up even a little bit, you're getting really close to the edge, and that's what breaks the edge of the pins off too. And of course, broken bits of metal aren't good in any situation, are they? Now, as a reminder, we'll just move this aside. That was the first case. Was it? No. Well, that was the second case I bought. Differential case. This is the first one. And if we can get the light just right, well, you can see the damage. Now, I did the second case because there was less damage, and most of this damage occurs after the pins shear. And in the first one, the pins sheared clean with the collar, or nearly clean. There's the collar. They were even shorter. That doesn't make sense. Okay, maybe these. No, these are the first pins, because the second pins are even shorter than that. Anyhow, when those pins break, and if you look inside here, see that elongation? Well, that's a new collar. That elongation is not caused by strong pins. That's after the pins broke and I continued using the tractor. So theoretically, I could drill these ones out to 12mm holes as well, and probably salvage this case because it actually looks worse than it is. 12mm pins again will cover a larger area. Okay. So anyway, as you can see, just putting a new collar on would give you a connection into that gear, which is right here. Now remember, we also need that that thrust washer in there. And if we look at that, now remember, the thrust washer is going to push this out just a hair. And we pull this out, and if we can see that. Okay, we bring that collar right out flush to the edge here, like on the other one. Where are those pins? They're not even close. And we're pushing it in, pushing it in, pushing it in. And finally, they get close to the gear. Remember, there's got to be a thrust washer put in here too. So we have to add, what was it? I forget the thickness of the thrust washer. But we have to add. So you can see, like, there's almost no room. And those pins are just being flexed right on the point of them. Okay, let's just push that in. And then we'll push it in just a little bit to allow for the thrust washer. And there, that's how much engagement you have in there. And if the edge of your pins are rounded out or your gear is rounded out, basically you have that much engagement. And to me, that just seems inadequate. Yeah, we pull it back flush. Look at that. Those pins fully retract. So now you see why I extended the pins by another 4mm. And you saw in the other example there that the pins engage nicely. Now, let's just remove this new collar. We'll take out the old worn gear without the thrust washer. We'll put this housing, damaged housing, away for the moment. And we'll bring in a brand new one that I bought and I'm not using. And you can see how nice those holes are. And those are the 10mm. And again, a brand new collar. And that's how that fits in there. Just like that. Now remember, you can see those pins sticking out of there. Remember, part of that space is taken up by the thrust washer, and part of that space is just out in the open there. So there's your pin engagement, about that deep, with that collar fully in and fully retracted. Well, look at that. Let's see, that's, let's try and get that flush. You can see those pins are basically retracted in the case, or maybe flush with rounded edges, right? So, just, as you can tell by my voice, I'm totally frustrated with this, but really happy with my modifications. And I don't anticipate any further problems. Okay, so remember, thrust washer goes in there. So there we go. So when you got that much pedal play and you're pushing down on your gear, and it's not, pedal's not going down all the way, and you're pushing like heck with your heel to get that engaged, you've got to get this gear to turn. I'm being redundant. So the pins are 12mm. And these holes have to be a little bit larger than that, but I didn't want to go oversize. So initially I looked at doing 31/64, and I think that's a bit tight. So now I've decided to go with 1/2 inch rather than metric. And it comes out with good numbers, as you can see here. 12.72mm. So that just gives us a little bit of breathing room. And as you can tell by my jig, it's very handy. But I didn't clamp this down because this was all buggered up, for lack of a better phrase. I figured clamping it down probably might be an issue, so I just freehanded it in, sitting on a jig with a hole in the bottom here to set the bearing surface into, to level it off, and took a shot at it. So hopefully it'll work. But I did do it with the 31/64, which is not big enough. 12.72 12.21. It's not enough slop. Unfortunately, what I discovered is the collar on here has some movement. So if this has some movement and these holes don't have enough clearance for the pins, you get binding and it won't engage smoothly. So I've had to enlarge the holes, and hopefully that measurement will work. So let's try that out. I got to clean up. This is the first, as you can tell by a little bit of the rust of this sitting around. At 1500 hours, this is the differential housing that I took out that was really beat up. I'm going to see if I can clean it up. Maybe I'll use it. Okay. Since I made this mistake, somebody else might. But this ring gear only goes on one way, and these locating pins only go in one way. The easiest way, as far as I can tell, to remember or note which way this gear goes on, and before it gets bolted up, I'm just ready to bolt it in. This groove is only on one side, and it has to face this way. I did try installing it backwards, which wasn't too smart, and the pins didn't fit right and didn't make any sense. So I played around with it and figured it out. These bearings are kind of neat because they are basically a slip fit. I mean, most people go like, oh, you got to use you should use a bearing tool on it, and I do have one that's bigger, but I'm just showing you what they are, right? Should use a bearing tool on it or a seal tool, but these fit just really nice, so I just kind of like tap them into place. And when I reverse take them off, so far I've been able to take them off with a couple of screwdrivers or pry bars. There we go. Now I don't know if there's a correct way or an incorrect way of putting this in, but I always put the numbers out so that you can read them. I guess a person should look at that when they take it apart. Okay, so by sound, that is bottomed out. And we're ready to torque these down. And I shall do that. Okay, this is something I'm not too happy with. Not sure what I can do about it. But this fork is supposed to slide that in and out. Well, if you look, those collars have a lot of play when they sit on that shaft. And that can cause a bit of binding. And I'm thinking that my holes through the metal here might have to be just a slight smidgen larger, because I'm getting resistance pushing it in. You can see that this goes cockeyed, but there's nothing I can do with that collar. And I don't really want to make the holes bigger, but I might not have a choice, because I can't afford to have this bind up. I can't do anything about it once it's in the tractor. And maybe after a few uses and a little bit of torquing, it will resolve itself. I mean, it does go in and out, but if I push on it and give it a bit of an angle, yeah, I don't know. I could sit here and do this all day to kind of like wear it in, maybe. I don't know. Trying it at different angles. But I think I'm going to put it together. I'm aware of what the issue is. I don't think it's the forks that are bent. And maybe with this held in place, maybe it'll help guide that straight in better. I did have smaller holes. I did have the 1/64 holes through this case, and I've increased it to 32/64 or a ½ inch, which is pins are 12 millimeters, so the holes are like 12.73. So that gives me 0.73 of a millimeter of clearance in there. You know, I probably should go for 1 millimeter, but I don't have a drill bit that would successfully do that, and I don't have a 12 millimeter reamer or expandable reamer that I can do that with either. So I did order a 10 millimeter, and I was thinking of originally replacing with 10 millimeter pins, but when I realized that 12 made more sense, I just didn't bother ordering a 12 millimeter adjustable reamer. Oh well, let's put her together and assume it's going to work perfectly fine. You know what happens when you assume. A couple of quick things to mention. The back bearing sits in this case, so you have to make sure that the gear setup is well seated. And if you look here, you can see that it's retracted back from that gear so that this bevel gear can go on top, which is your drive gear. As far as I know, I guess that's PTO feed to the front. That's what that is. That's PTO to the front. And oh yes, so many parts and pieces I don't understand, or I don't remember. And the other thing to remember, this here little shift lever, there's a little O-ring that goes back in there. Make sure you lubricate it and tuck it back in there, otherwise all your oil will leak out there. You know, it's probably wise to replace that O-ring. It is an O-ring. It just slips back in there. It's just a friction fit, which I'll just move that here. This goes on here. Make sure you put the pin in the right way. I guess that way is fine, because that way if the clip comes off, it won't fall out. The pin won't fall out. Look at that. That's smoother than I expected. That's engaging, disengaging, engaging, disengaging, as far as I know. Or engaged and disengaged. One or the other. Well, it is together, and this is the Diff-Lock lever, which moves up and down, and you can see here it's locked in, and here it spins, and there it locks, and there it spins. So it works. Yay! It engages, disengages. Got the 12 millimeter pins in there. Everything clears. And it all works. So now to put the tractor together. Differential is done with a differential lock.